Hello, children. This is Miss Gloria from New Life Church, and we're having another lesson about what is God really like. Now, there are lots of fancy words for what God is really like, and one of them that you might have heard is omniscient. Well, that's a fancy Latin word, but what it really means is all-knowing. God is all-knowing. God knows everything. So we're going to hear a story today. You might have heard this story before. It's the story of Jonah. But let's find out what this story tells us about how God knows everything. Here's the beginning of the story. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So you see, Jonah was one of God's people, and he probably prayed to God, and he knew that God knew him. But God didn't just know about his own people. God knew about the city of Nineveh too, and he knew that they were just terrible, that the things they were doing were so bad that it would be better for the world if the whole city were destroyed. And God wanted Jonah to go tell the Ninevites that their city was going to be destroyed. But you know what? Jonah didn't want to do it. The story doesn't say why. Maybe he was afraid of the Ninevites. Maybe he just really didn't like them. But so Jonah decided to do something really stupid. He decided to hide from God. He had this idea that he could go the opposite direction and get on a ship that went out clear into the middle of the ocean that God wouldn't be able to find him. Well, that was a pretty stupid idea because, as we learned before, God is everywhere and God knows everything. And God knew exactly where Jonah was. And so what happened is that Jonah was sleeping on board the ship, and suddenly a huge storm came up. And the sailors on the ship woke Jonah up, and they said, everybody's praying to their gods to save them from this storm. You pray to your God too, because people worshipped all kinds of different gods. The sailors were not God's people. But Jonah said, I know why there's this storm. It's because of me. It's because I'm running away from God, and he's the only real God. And the only way you could stop the storm would be to throw me into the water. The sailors didn't want to do that. They were actually pretty nice people, even if they weren't worshiping the true God. And they didn't want to throw Jonah in the water. And they tried to get away from the storm, but they couldn't. So finally, they just decided to do what Jonah said. And they realized it was a stupid idea to run away from God. They threw Jonah into the water, and the storm stopped immediately. And then they knew that Jonah's God was the real God. Well, some of you might know what happened to Jonah next. But while we're thinking about that part of the story, let's talk about what God knows about us. One of the things that says that God knows about us, he knows entirely what our bodies are like. God helped make them when they were being formed inside of our mothers, and God knows what our bodies are like, but maybe we don't know. You might have heard that our bodies are kind of mostly water, but what does mostly mean? I have a cup here, and you see this cup has lines on it. So this one here in the middle is about halfway up, and that's like 50%. And this one up here is 3/4 the way up, that's 75%. This one down here is 25%. So think to yourself, how much water do you think there really is that you're made of? And you guess, and I'm going to pour the water in and then see how close your guess is. Let's see. Are we maybe 25% water? 50% water? Well, it's a little more than 50%. The average person is about 60% water. Maybe that should be a little bit more. But it turns out, of course, that parts of your body are made of more water than other parts. We have different organs in our body, like our brains and our hearts and our stomachs and things. The biggest organ of our body, do you know what the biggest organ of your body is? It's the skin. And the skin is about 64% water, which is about the rest of it. Maybe our bones have less water because our bones are big and hard, but some parts of us have a lot more water. How much water do you think is in your brain? How much brain do you think your water is in your brain? Let's see. Actually, the brain is pretty much close to 3/4 water, about 73% water. But some parts of us even have more water than that. Astonishingly, the part of our body that has the most water is our lungs. Our lungs are about 85% water. You'd be surprised because you think your lungs are for breathing air and your lungs are breathing water, but your lungs, how they work, is mostly made of water. So that's one of the kind of astonishing things that we can learn about our bodies that God knows. And we know now because of science, but people didn't know that for a long time. But there are lots of things that we don't know. God doesn't just know about our bodies, but he knows what's in our hearts too. So let's see what happened to Jonah. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the body of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now you may have heard the story about Jonah and the whale, and that's because when people thought of a really big fish, they naturally thought of a whale. We don't actually know what kind of a fish it was. Some people might say, well, a whale isn't even really a fish. But anyway, some big sea creature swallowed up Jonah, and Jonah was in there 3 days, but then it says that Jonah prayed to God. God knew not just where Jonah's body was inside of a fish in the middle of the ocean, but he knew what was going on in Jonah's mind and heart. Here's Jonah praying. He says, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry." And he has a lot longer prayer. But when Jonah prayed his long prayer, God heard him, and let's see what happened. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. It just spit him right up into dry land. So, since we're talking about being inside the stomach of a fish, let's talk about some things about ourselves, other things that are inside of ourselves. So you may know that when you eat food, it goes to your stomach, and your stomach helps digest your food. But your stomach can't get the food to the other parts of your body. After your food goes to the stomach, it goes down into your intestines. Your intestines are what actually sends the food to other parts of your body. How big do you think your intestines are? They're actually much bigger than you think. I have a piece of rope here. They say that your intestines are 27 feet long. Look at this. 27 feet long. Maybe yours might be a little shorter because you're kids, but the average grown-up, their intestines are 27 feet long. Look at that. Look how much that would be. So much. This rope is actually a little longer than 27 feet because I didn't feel like cutting my rope. But 27 feet long would be something like this much, up to about here maybe. Look at all of that. But where is all of that inside of you? It's so big. Well, the answer is it's just coiled up inside of you, down underneath your stomach. Even though it's 27 feet long, we can make it a lot smaller so it would fit inside of you. But that's one of the things that God knows about you. He knows exactly how long your intestines are. He knows all the things that are going on inside of your body, all the things that are going on inside of your mind, all the things that are going on inside of your heart. And he knows that about everybody. So let's see what happened next in the story. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. "Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I gave you." So Jonah, this time, he obeyed God, and he went to Nineveh. Nineveh was a huge city. It took 3 days to walk across the city, and Jonah kept preaching, "This city will be destroyed because it is so wicked." But you know what? The people of Nineveh believed Jonah, and they were sorry. And they did all kinds of things to show that they were sorry. And they prayed to God, and they asked God to forgive them. And it says here, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. So God not only knew what was going on in the Ninevites' hearts, but he knew when their hearts changed. God knows everything about our minds and our hearts. God is all-knowing. He knows everything about us, even things that we can't even know. The stuff about how much water we had and how long our intestines are, we can know with science. But you know, it says in the Bible that God even knows exactly how many hairs there are on your head. Well, I looked it up. How many hairs are on a person's head? Well, they counted some hairs on some people's heads, and maybe people have about 100,000 hairs. But that's just sort of an estimate, an average. They didn't really count all 100,000 hairs. They counted the hairs in one little area, and then they figured out how much. That was probably the same amount of the other thing. They didn't count up to 100,000. But God knows exactly how many hairs you have, and if a hair falls out, he knows what that number is. Maybe it's 1,356, and then a hair falls out, and it's 1,365. God knows absolutely everything about you. God is all-knowing. And that means he knows what's in your mind and your heart, too. And that means that if we turn our hearts to God, God always knows that, too. And even if we deserve to have something bad happen to us because we did bad things like the people of Nineveh, God knows if we turn our hearts to us, and God is always wanting to forgive us. God knows us all, and he loves us all.